WWT presents Experts.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of WWT Experts. I'm your host, Matthew Coble, as usual. And today we are having a conversation with two experts about, federal civilian agencies and government agencies and how they work with various technologies. And today, as federal civilian agencies continue to digitize citizen services, security operation teams must really protect a greater amount of sensitive data. And they must also provide environments where agencies can safely and quickly explore how emerging technologies like AI, which everyone's talking about these days, can really enhance those citizen services. In this episode, we're talking about how federal civilian agencies can safeguard civilian data while still enabling all those innovations that we're looking for as civilians in society. So I've got two experts with us today. First up, we've got Brandon Bulldis, who is engineering director for our federal civilian business. He started as a communications tech in the United States Air Force at the very beginning of his career and is now a seasoned IT professional with over 20 years of experience. He's got a passion for helping organizations harness the power of technology, and he has guided customers in both the public and private sectors to achieve their business goals. He's dedicated to educating others and really staying ahead of the ever-evolving world of technology, and especially in the security space, which we're going to talk about today. Also with us is Brian Tillett, who's the director of our public sector cybersecurity advisory team. He has over 25 years of experience as a senior cybersecurity advisor, and he's guided top executives and global organizations in transforming cybersecurity into a mission enabler and a competitive advantage. From delivering congressional testimony to leading global programs for the U.S. military, Brian is really a trusted leader and an expert across industries and government organizations worldwide. So we're delighted to have him here too. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, Matt, thank you so much for having us. I'm very excited about this conversation and, live from the basement, very excited.
Very good. Excellent.
Agree. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Matt. Thanks for having us here. And it'll be good to chat on a bunch of different topics regarding cybersecurity and the challenges across these public sector federal civilian agencies.
Yeah, agreed. Well, let's jump in. So broadly speaking, how would you currently characterize the cybersecurity landscape for federal civilian agencies in the market?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the things that we need to kind of talk about up front is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer for civilian agencies. Each of the agencies has their own mission, has their own outcomes that they're trying to do, their own citizen experiences that they're trying to work towards or trying to solve. Some of the commonalities that they do have, though, is they're still working through a lot of legacy systems. So how do, that complexity of supporting legacy systems that have been around, that have been supporting the mission and the business outcomes for, 30, 40 years, how do they continue to support those with the current cyber trends? And that as well as continue to protect that citizen data, which they hold all of that data today. So it's it's getting more and more complex for them because they don't necessarily always have the same resources, budgets, all that their commercial brethren do have to try to solve the same types of security issues. So complex is the short version of that sentence.
Yeah, and I will echo that in saying that I think from a cybersecurity perspective, security operations centers, security programs, we're doing the best we can to create an architecture, a platform approach to things. But all too often, we just find ourselves in the federal government, unfortunately, struggling with time, whether it be the time to get things implemented, the time to get things optimized, and the time to actually look forward to things. It is just, unfortunately, a challenge in the federal government. And I think it's a good place for organizations such as WWT to be able to talk to a lot of those different things and add assistance to our federal civilian customers.
Yeah. Well, I imagine, we as civilians are expecting more and more out of those organizations in terms of like digitization and providing digital access to the services they offer. And so as that continues to expand, what are the key cybersecurity challenges that creates for these agencies?
Well, I'll take that for the first swag that when there I think one of our most difficult things, specifically talking to the citizens and being able to help them adjust to what it's going to be like for digital services from the federal government, is why it's happening. I think a lot of folks are always kind of seeing this as a mission inhibitor or something that is making it harder to do your business, your work, your task with the federal government. And I think we can do a better job, all of us as cybersecurity professionals, in educating the public as to what the risks are, as opposed to if your information gets leaked, if your information gets breached, or something of that nature. You might be able to get a new Social Security number. You might be able to get a new credit card number in the event of a breach, but you don't get another healthcare record. You do not get another complete background investigation if that has been breached out. So again, recognizing what the risks are and making sure the public understands why things are transitioning, why it might be viewed upon as a little bit harder to get things done, but it's for the safety of the citizens in the long term.
Agree, Brian. I think part of also what they're struggling with is there's tons of niche partners that solve different parts of this problem for them. And when you're looking at that, the security landscape, the tooling landscape, every CISO, every security person has seen those slides where there's, 1,500 different security vendors out there. There's so many different ones that are looking to try to help solve and solve that type of public aspect of it. But they're just further behind, unfortunately, than their commercial brethren in being able to do that. And so the experience has changed from a citizen, perspective, where they want things on an app, on a phone, they want things quick, they want things easy. But the systems behind it and the systems in front of it for CISOs and for the Fed Civ side don't have all this. They don't have the same level of security requirements, or they have a higher level of security requirements. It's probably a better way of saying that than their commercial brethren. So it takes it a little bit longer for that adoption.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I imagine that the answer to this would vary from one agency to another, but I'm curious, what advice are you providing to our clients and others here around the right balance between data protection on the one side and sort of those excellent citizen experiences on the other? Where do you find that balance?
Yeah, so where we're starting to see a lot of agencies find success is really identifying kind of what is that internal IT system that they need to protect from that boundary perspective, and then what is that data that they need to protect from a citizen perspective. They're also starting to and have adopted different zero trust methodologies and different pillars within zero trust. So it's continuing to expand on the zero trust, finding ways to maximize investments, find ways to do what they've been doing really well, find those gaps, bridge those gaps, and then try to stay up with the mandates that are coming out seemingly on a biannual basis.
And I'll also add on there is our customers, if you will, our federal civilians, the ones that we're actually serving with the mission, they don't understand all the challenges that we go through here, whether it be budget constraints or whether it be timing constraints. Again, making it easy for them to interact with the federal government, whether or not it be an AI chatbot or maybe something where they don't have to wait on hold or they can find information, but making interaction easier, I think, is one of the most important things to do here, but also balancing that with what the federal government can afford to do from both a budget and a time constraint.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned AI there, and I'm curious, how are you seeing security teams in these agencies sort of seeing to the responsible adoption of new and emerging technologies? And of course, the top one we'd talk about right now would probably be generative AI, because on the one hand, those can really enhance some of the services that they provide, but they also demonstrate or sort of present new risks potentially. So how do you advise clients on that front?
I think part of what they need to do is kind of look at it from two different approaches. There's the AI practitioner, the AI IT practitioner, who's the folks doing the data centers that are going to leverage AI built into the tooling, built in there to be able to increase operations, increase efficiency, to do those things, but that's built-in AI tool. The other part is what I think when you talk about, Matt, there around the Gen AI aspect of it, or embracing new AI technology. So it's how do you secure that AI workload? How do you secure those large language models? How do you secure where you're pulling data from? How do you know that you're not inadvertently allowing injections of bad data into those models and getting, either whether it's hallucinations or you're starting to get just bad conclusions because data is being injected into that. And so it's two different types of security approaches. Leveraging AI, the traditional one, optimizing it a little bit more. And then the other side of how do you secure that AI workload and looking at the right partners and tooling that are doing those types of things.
And Matt, I think you hit a key word when we first started this topic around AI is responsible adoption and really recognizing what it is we're trying to do from an AI outcome perspective, what it is we're trying to accomplish as we're moving forward. So one of the things I like to say is AI, it's in its infancy. As fast as it's growing, it's still in its infancy. And what's the first thing you do when you bring an infant home? You build a playpen, you baby-proof the house, and you basically build a padded cell for the baby to live and grow. And I think the same type of thing is relevant here for AI is once we've identified what a good mission case, what a good use case is for AI, let's build a protected environment where we've made sure that we're patching all the vulnerabilities, we're patching all the code, and we've got a safe environment for AI to live and grow. We want to make sure we don't have biases that are introduced. And the way that we do that is by making sure all the back doors and all the holes are closed. It's not like you can roll back your AI technology to a date that you think that something was good, as if for like a breach or a hack or something. AI is constantly growing. It is constantly learning. We need to make sure that we fortify the environment for AI to grow, and then we can go ahead and move it forward into further citizen services.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you talk with federal civilian agencies, I imagine in some cases the security teams inside are kind of regarded as more blockers to new technologies or evolutions of things, whereas they might rather be enablers. So I'm curious, how do you see that playing out, and how do those teams also make sure that security is really perceived as a responsibility across the entire organization and not just within the security team?
It's actually one of my favorite topics to talk about is, as you can see behind me, one of my background pictures is I race cars as a personal hobby. And I like to reprogram how people think about cybersecurity. And the type of car racing that I do, it's road racing. And when you're road racing, it's not the fastest car that wins the race. It is the driver that uses the brakes the least. If you use the brakes the least, guess what? You're on the gas more often. And that same type of process, that same thought process exists around cybersecurity. We can reprogram how we think about cybersecurity, that it becomes a mission or business enabler. We can solve the mission or business problem even that much faster. So embedding cybersecurity instead of bolting it on afterwards, having cybersecurity being a decision maker on how you adopt the cloud, how you move forward, how you migrate, and how things change from a transition perspective, instead of figuring out security after something has already been decided. That's how we actually move cybersecurity into something that is not a Dr. No organization, but is something that is a yes, but, or yes, how, and we're able to do the mission all that much better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're hitting on there is just the culture part of it for these federal civilian agencies as they're looking at it, right? For years, it's been great silos working kind of sort of together. They've done things in their own little silos, but they've worked sort of in concert together. How do you break, when you start talking anything next gen, you start talking AI, you start talking these new trends, how do you get outside those silos and work together and have better cross partnerships between the business and the IT ops and the new chief AI folks that exist within their agencies. So it is really looking at that culture. It's the other aspect of that is really trying to solve the problem, not trying to say, hey, we can't do it, because it's going Gen AI, and this is what agencies are seeing. People have used it because it's easy to use. They're finding employees that are going to try to figure out a way to leverage it. They're going to try to figure out a way around it. So it's embracing, how do we get to a yes, not it's a no, until it's how do we figure out yes, how do we put some guardrails around this out the gate so that we don't inadvertently have spillages, we don't inadvertently put our data out there into models that we don't want it to go out there. So it's trying to stay ahead of that from that perspective.
Yeah. Well, Brandon, I want to build on that a little bit. Like, how do you actually counsel clients to do that, to get to that headspace of saying yes to things rather than just being blocked? Like, how do you provide that? What do you say to get them to do that?
Yeah, no, great question. There's been a couple of places in which we've done some, like a consulting opportunity with a customer with a particular agency, in which we walk through what their cyber plan should be. We worked with that CISO, helping them build their cyber plan. How do they start hitting some of the, like M2131? How do they start hitting some of these things that they're trying to hit, whilst also trying to enable the business? And so that's been a strong partnership that we've had on our team within Federal Civilian. We have folks like Brian, and then we also have former CISOs that can kind of come in and help do that aspect of it. The other part is we really leverage and have leveraged different workshops to kind of come in and look at the investments they've made. What are the investments you've already made? How do you maximize that investment? How do you start to use the tools to their full capability, as opposed to just continuing to buy niche tools to solve a singular problem? So those are a couple of ways that we've been able to help save both money, but more importantly, save time for the CISOs in that CISO org to be able to hit those objectives.
Mm-hmm. Well, something I think about with federal civilian agencies is maybe a little bit different from the private sector, is that there sometimes can be very kind of discrete guidance around the funding and what the funding should be for. But at times, I have to imagine within federal civilian agencies that there are unfunded mandates that emerge, or unfunded security needs that come out of the works that these organizations have to deal with. So how do you counsel them to kind of reshape funding or kind of rework funding to be able to cover some of those unfunded things that may come along?
Well, I think Brandon took one of the, actually already started on that path with his last answer there. And I think that is optimizing what you've already invested in. We've seen what's happened in the cybersecurity landscape over the last 15 years or so. There's been a lot of buying sprees. There's been a lot of consolidation. And most of the cybersecurity vendors out there, the larger ones, are these platform approaches where they do a lot of different things. It's endpoint, it's network, it's detection, it is DLP, it is encryption. And all too often we see that a suite or a platform has been bought, but it hasn't been fully invested in from a use case scenario. So one of the first things I will do from an advisory perspective is let's just take inventory of everything that you are entitled to. And what else can we turn on? What else can we turn up and tweak the dials without additional capital expenditure? Because as you mentioned there, again, the funding is the issue. And not only that, but the time as well as the personnel. So what else can we do to tweak the dials and be able to say, all right, now I've got this additional control, which I wasn't using, and I didn't recognize that I can apply it towards this CISA mandate or FISMA mandate or executive order XYZ. And now I've had an additional control, which all I needed to do was turn it on and optimize it. And that's where you can lean on part of the partner ecosphere in order to make that happen.
I think the other part of that is just helping prioritize, working with them to prioritize which things actually are going to get the most return on their both time, investment, stance, and all that. Often enough, there's a new tool or a new process that gets brought in to these agencies that is solving a great problem that they don't actually have. So it's trying to actually, weed through that, work with them to weed through those types of things that are going on to actually solve problems that they do have, not create a problem and then solve a problem.
All right, well, let's shift to metrics for a second. I'm curious, from your point of view, what are the most important things to measure within these organizations to demonstrate the success of their security work?
So every federal CISO, most federal CISOs, civilian CISOs, have their dashboard that they have to report up to today. That is looking at, how are they evaluated based off of the different mandates, the compliance of it, all those types of metrics. So that's an easy one. You can pull that down. You can take a look at that, see what's going on. I think what is probably something to really think through is how do they continue to move up their curve? How do they continue to move down that roadmap? They have zero trust strategies, and they're at different levels depending on where they are within each of those pillars. Tracking where's that movement? Are they hitting timeframes? Are they hitting timelines? Are they returning time? Are they blocking breaches? Are they blocking foreign attack type events? So it's taking a look at those things from that perspective. I don't know, Brian, if you have any other thoughts on that aspect of it.
Yeah, metrics is another really interesting topic here, and specifically in public sector, it's often what does this mean? It's not like I can talk about protecting the brand or protecting market cap or the reputation of an organization as I do in commercial and enterprise sector. But it's not as if a federal agency is going to go out of business if they get breached or if they lose citizen data. They still have to operate. So the metrics conversation, mean time to detect, mean time to remediate, these type of things, you might not want to measure remediation because you might actually want to let a threat execute so you can go back and find some artifacts. So you can go back to attribution. So recognizing what type of metrics are relevant to your organization, I think that's important there as well. But let's just start at the basics. Things like application testing and penetration testing. The main reason we do penetration and application testing is not to identify vulnerabilities. It is to reduce vulnerabilities over time. So if you're actually able to measure those things over time, and then that becomes a conversation with procurement as well. Because if you spend, and I'm just making these numbers up, $100,000 on a penetration test, and you find 20 trophies in year X, and then year Y, you spend another $100,000 on a penetration test, and you only find 5 trophies, well, procurement thinks, well, I probably got ripped off because I spent the same amount of money and I got less trophies. But actually, that was a win for the security team because the same level of effort have found fewer vulnerabilities. So being able to recognize those metrics, being able to say, all right, this is what it means to my agency, and be able to track and measure those things, again, from the basics over time is extremely important.
Well, I'm curious if I'm thinking about the teams that are in these organizations and whether they're doing a good job of kind of proactively identifying and sort of mitigating risks, or if there are other things they need to be doing more of to do that more effectively. What are you seeing?
I think as we look at the infrastructure of our organizations, as they become more mature, and when I say infrastructure, I mean routing and switch and just the basics and blocking and tackling, there's a tremendous amount of additional capabilities that come from modern routing, switch, internet, and even internet-facing and even cloud-facing technologies. And that is to be able to say, what can I look at from an east-west traffic perspective? As I see now these new technologies, whether it, again, be cloud-based or even old-school brick-and-mortar data center-based, be able to say, all right, what is normal in my environment? If you cannot detect something abnormal unless you know what normal is in the first place. And as we've looked to upgrade our infrastructure, there's a tremendous amount of output on the back end of these technologies, which we are not using at their full advantage for threat hunting. So enabling threat hunting, be able to say, all right, this is normal, and now I identify something that's abnormal. Do I have compromised credentials? Do I have a malicious insider? What has happened? And I think we have incident detection, we have incident response, we have teams responsible for this at the SOC level and at the incident response level. But what are your incident responders doing when they're not responding to an incident? Well, let's turn them into threat hunters and let's have them go look at the other technologies from a proactive perspective. And these are the things which we are looking to leapfrog and move forward with in order to be able to speed up these detections.
Yeah, I agree with most of that. I think one of the things that the agencies in federal civilian look at is not every organizational CISO has all control over every part of their organization. Depending on what's going on, they have different security folks that have different standards, have different things that they're trying to pull together. They've been trying to move towards like full stack observability. We've heard about that for a long time. They've been trying to look at those types of things. So, how do they get more proactive? It's working in concert. How do I pull the data from these other security entities within my organization? Like if you look at Department of Energy as an example, what the central CISO is looking for is different than what the labs are looking at. And each lab has its own CISO, has its own security, has its own part of it. So how do they work in concert to leverage the tools that each of the labs have to bring it into the tools that central IT is using in order to have a better security posture overall from that standpoint. So that's, a little bit different from that perspective. The threat hunting, I agree. I think that especially within the network, a lot of the things that federal civilian agencies hear around that tend to feel more DoD centric. And that's where there's a little bit of a shift of, it's more adopting some more of the commercial practices on how they do this, leveraging in and leveraging, some of the commercial best practices, what they're doing in order to do it, because their threat is more similar to like an e-commerce threat than it is a military type threat. So it's looking at different industries than just what is federal doing to get proactive.
Agree.
All right, well, gentlemen, I know that both of you spend a lot of your time in the public sector space, which is great, and our clients are lucky to have you be doing that, but also know that you both spent time in the private sector. So I'm curious to hear from you, what do you think that the public sector can learn from the private sector and vice versa when it comes to cybersecurity?
I'll go first, Brian, if you don't mind. Yeah. So from a private sector, there generally tends to be within the security professionals a mantra of let's share everything we're doing from a security perspective at all times, because the more secure we are together, the more secure everything is. So there isn't so much I'm going to close and I'm not going to share what I'm doing from my organization to your organization, even with what we perceive competitors within that patch. When it comes to security, not necessarily across the board, when it comes specifically to security, commercial entities tend to share a little bit more. Within federal civilian, they do have CISO groups, they do have folks that get together, but they tend to be so busy, or they tend not to share as many of those security practices. So I think that cross collaboration between what agencies are doing and what commercial is doing, I think that's a big part of what is a good practice that they could learn a little bit on that standpoint. And then, Brian, I don't know if you have some thoughts on as far as specific types of tooling or things to look at.
Yeah, there's some thought processes which I have seen and implemented and guided within commercial and enterprise sector, specifically development organizations. So, if you will, even the gamification of development. If one of the things I've seen in commercial sector, specifically in manufacturing and security vendors, is if you have 4 or 5 development teams, they're literally pitting each other against each other for who develops the most secure code. And essentially, when you're measuring how fast you can actually get to market, when you can actually recognize revenue on a solution, an application, a product that's been developed. If you develop the product and you move it into production, and when you move it into production, you go through your security checks and you find out the technology is full of holes. Well, guess what? You need to recycle back into the DevSecOps cycle and actually, start all over again. So if we could adopt some of those practices where we're actually leveraging the smarts from one organization against the smarts from another organization, and be able to bring these teams together and leverage these the outcome even better. These are some of the practices which I've seen successfully implemented in the enterprise sector.
Cool.
Sorry, Matt. Before we move on, the one thing I think commercial potentially, I'm not going to speak to every bit of it. It's been a little while since I moved out of commercial, could learn a little bit from the federal government, from the civilian agencies, is sometimes moving a little bit slower can help, because then you can solve the security problem before you have too significant of a breach or get the information out there. So there is a little bit of, let me pause, make sure this makes sense, because once that data's gone, it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, well, I do love that, there's collaboration that could go in both directions, and both sides could learn from one another. All right, last question for you both. As you look out, a year out, a couple years out, what do you think are the top security priorities or kind of emerging trends that federal civilian agencies are going to have to be thinking about and dealing with?
Yeah, so taking a look forward, looking at the kind of that explosion of AI and what's gone on with that, civilian agencies are going to have to continue to get more sophisticated, because those foreign state actors that are going to start using AI as an external threat to try to attack, to try to disrupt that digital experience, that citizen experience. So getting a little bit more sophisticated from that standpoint. The other one, and again, I'm not an expert in this by any stretch, but with the quantum encryption, taking a look at that and being able to understand and how to leverage that, how to secure those communications, north, south, east, west, inside, outside, and be able to have that totality because of how sophisticated the threat vectors are from the outside now is getting more and more. So I think that is a big area that we need to, and they need to continue to try to stay ahead of.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll also add on that is I know we wouldn't have a relevant conversation at any time if we didn't have AI in the conversation, and we've already mentioned that several times here.
Sure.
And I also want to break that down into 2 different directions. So we've got cybersecurity for AI, and then we've got AI for cybersecurity, and defining that inside of an organization. So cybersecurity for AI is using cybersecurity tools technologies, practices, and other solutions to develop AI instantiations securely, which I talked about earlier. And then there's also AI for cybersecurity, which is what other tools, what other technologies that are AI based can I lay over the top of my cybersecurity infrastructure to help me get ahead, to help me think faster, to help me convict an incident faster. If you can measure time, you can measure an investment, you can measure dollars. If I can measure the amount of time I've reduced in chair swiveling that it takes me to go from one technology to the next to convict an incident and then start responding to that incident, I think that's an area where AI is going to be important to us. And especially when we talk about federated agencies, much as Brandon discussed in one of his previous questions here, is we've got a headquarters agency with several federated instantiations underneath of it. How can you use an AI tool or AI practices to garner information and see trends and then elevate that back up to headquarters? I think that's going to be some key areas where we're going to see AI invested in both those directions.
Great stuff. I appreciate it. And, Brandon and Brian, thanks so much for being with us today.
No, Matt, really appreciate the time to come and talk through this. I mean, it is a challenge that these agencies have to go through, and I don't envy them, but we're here to help.
Yeah.
Yep, roger that. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Brandon. We appreciate the time here.
Yeah. And thank you for joining us as well. If you enjoyed this show, please check out the others that we have on federal civilian agencies and how they're using technologies to achieve their mission objectives. That and much, much more is available out on WWT.com. You can see the big back catalog of video content we have to watch on demand anytime, as well as the calendar of stuff that's coming up soon. So please be sure to check that out. Love to hear your feedback. So if you get that survey in the email, please let us know how we did, or just drop us a note and tell us that as well. And with that, we will wrap today's session. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.